tonight we have for our guest speaker, we have Mike Pizzaro with the Watershed Institute. And Mike I'm just going to briefly read the bio that you sent to us, Mike, if that's all right. Mike is with the Watershed Institute since 2014. Before that, he was practicing attorney for nearly 20 years and is licensed in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. For more than 10 years, Mike ran his own law firm, concentrating on environmental work for citizens and environmental organizations before local land use boards, the DEP, and in litigation. So I'm honored to serve with Mike. I'm newly on the steering committee for the Watershed Association Council and learning a lot, and looking forward to hearing Mike speak this evening.
Thank you very much, Allison. And it's been a pleasure working with you the last couple months, bringing some fresh energy. And thank you all for coming tonight and listening to me drone on. I was going to say, it's about 4 years ago, I was able to come up and actually do a presentation. Art had invited me to come up and talk about I think it was the flood hazard rules at the time. I was trying to find that presentation. So I do miss the free pizza. The commute was a little bit longer, but so before I get started, Allison asked me to talk a little bit about what we do at the Watershed Institute, to talk about stormwater management and anything else that comes up, I guess. I just wanted to sort of get a show of hands. Who's aware of the new DEP stormwater rules that came out right before the pandemic in March of 2020? All right. And how many, do you know whether your towns have actually adopted a new ordinance at this point?
None. We're working on it.
All right. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Let's see if I'm trying this time to use Google Slides since I've not been in the office. So let's see if this works. I have not used Google Slides to do a presentation before. So
we see it.
All right.
Yeah.
So great. So a little bit about the Watershed Institute. We're a little over 70 years old now. We formed a little over 70 years ago, and keeping our water clean, safe, and healthy is a heart of our mission. We started off as the Stony Brook Millstone Watershed Association. So when I came up 4 years ago, that was the name I went under. And since we became the Watershed Institute a little over 2, maybe 3 years ago now, we've sort of embraced and sort of expanded our work. We've always done both very hyper-local action and work, but also state-level work. And we also administer some state-level programs. And we do a lot of different things. So we're a staff about 30-ish people, both full-time mostly and some part-time. And we have a Department of Science that does scientific investigation and monitoring, advocacy. That is my department, and I have a municipal policy specialist, an outreach coordinator who works with small grants and works with other watershed groups and other, and actually expanded into more community outreach. And then we have a stormwater specialist who works on stormwater. We have environmental education. I always joke with the environmental education department that, you know, maybe they should just go away, advocacy, but really they are really the heart of the organization. Everything from pre-K programs all the way up to adult education. They run a summer camp, and, you know, if you understand nature and out in nature, you can't help but love it. And if you love it, you can't help try to protect it. But don't ever tell the education department I said that. And then we have a 950-acre reserve, a LEED Platinum building where we try to mimic and, you know, walk the talk. So we have green roof, we have rain gardens, we have porous pavement, and as I mentioned, it's a LEED Platinum building, which is really great to work on. So tonight I wanted to talk a little bit about stormwater management, NJPAC, which is the New Jersey Protecting Against Climate Threats. So I guess there should be a T, and then some community involvement opportunities, some ways to engage your community. And please, if I'm saying something and you want to jump in and ask a question, please feel free. I probably have a lot more slides than I'm going to go through tonight. I tend to do that. The lawyer in me always wants to have more than I really need. Or I can really talk fast and we can go through them very quickly. Up to you. And then, play it back at slower speed. So, stormwater management in New Jersey really started back in 1981. And the old way of thinking was to get it, it was a waste product. It was a problem. You got it on your property. You got rid of it as fast as you could. And that, that caused problems. But that was what we did. And we mostly dealt from it from a flooding perspective back in the 80s and early 90s. It wasn't a water quality thing. It wasn't a groundwater. It was literally trying not to flood your property and trying to control it and move it somewhere else. Sort of the Model T approach of stormwater management. In 2004, that changed a bit, and then DEP promulgated some regulations. And if you've ever been to a land use board, planning or zoning, you're sort of somewhat familiar with this. If you have a major development, which is either an acre of soil disturbance or a quarter acre of impervious surface, you have to do stormwater management. So that's been sort of the rubric since 2004, maybe a little bit before that. But that's sort of what we're familiar with. And that stormwater management is quality, quantity, and recharge, QQR. And quantity is really a misnomer, and I hate it. Because really what you're doing is you're slowing the rate that stormwater is leaving your site. You're not reducing the volume, you're just slowing it down. You're in fact actually increasing the volume, because where the normal land would have been absorbing some of the stormwater, all that impervious surface is just directing it somewhere. You're treating the water quality, you're removing the increase of total suspended solids by 80%. And you're trying to address nutrients, but I would bet if I went to 1,000 planning board meetings, I don't think I've ever heard the word nutrients in any stormwater management discussion by the planning board or zoning board. It's one of those things we don't talk about, but with our lakes and the harmful algal blooms, it's a problem, and it's becoming worse. And then recharge, you want to retain and re-infiltrate into the ground, your groundwater. So that's quality, quantity, and recharge. That's what we've been operating on since 2004. Now, in March 2nd of 2020, right before the pandemic, DEP adopted the Green Infrastructure Rule. And it did a lot of things, but one of the big things is it doesn't change the treatment standard. That quantity, quality, and recharge requirements, those stayed the same. It does change how you meet those standards, what techniques, what best management practices you use to meet those standards, but the overall treatment standards did not change. Most in the environmental community think that was a huge loss opportunity. We really missed something there. And you have rain gardens. That's really what we're going to be seeing in the future. And for some reason, my other picture didn't show up, where the old way with the giant basins, at the bottom of a development, that's no longer going to be what we allow. So when I say you change how we do it, not what we do really, so you're going to use green infrastructure. And DEP defines this by treating through infiltration to subsoils, running it through vegetation or soil, or storing it for reuse. That is what DEP defines as green infrastructure. They've also tweaked that major development definition a bit. One of it is sort of taking what they've always done and putting it in the regulation. So they've always, even though the rules never said it, what they always did is that you only had to treat water quality for surfaces that were motor vehicle surfaces. So if you could drive over it, you had to treat it for water quality. Your roof runoff, you did not have to treat for water quality. Again, this is something we think is a mistake because roof runoff, sidewalk runoff, patio runoff is not necessarily clean. It may not have the same pollutants that road runoff has, but it still has pollution. So we think that's a missed opportunity. And then they sort of had this look back provision. So now, if you either individually or cumulatively create that quarter acre of impervious surface since February of 2004, you have to treat water quality. So if on February 2nd, you built your project and you had, 2/10 of an acre of impervious surface, and next week you come in and you want to do another, 1/10 of an acre to make my life easier. That normally would not have triggered the stormwater rules because you're under a quarter acre, but now since that's a cumulative since February of 2004, you do, and now that whole quarter acre or that 0.3 of an acre has to be treated for water quality, quantity, and recharge. So, I mean, that is a big change. A little bit of a cumulative or redevelopment standard, which is good. And that goes back to when the last time the rules were adopted. So, as I mentioned, it sort of changes the way stormwater manages. So this was a project that was actually approved by a town in May or June of last year. And this is about a 70-acre site, and you can see the arrows. That all drains to two separate wet ponds. So down at the bottom of the project, sort of out of the way, everything is draining and being piped to these two wet ponds at the bottom, which then drains into wetlands and into a stream. That's the old way of doing it. This would no longer, once your town has a stormwater ordinance that complies with the new rules, be allowed. The new way, and this is not at all scientific or engineering, is you're going to take those green circles, those are your bioretention, that is your green infrastructure, and you're going to distribute it throughout the site. It's no longer going to be somewhere down at the bottom of the project, out of the way. It's going to be distributed throughout your site because DEP's created these drainage area limitations. And this is one of the charts in the new rules where you can only have 1 acre draining into a dry well. You can only have up to 2.5 acres draining into a small scale bioretention. And the thought DEP has with this is we want to mimic nature, we want to decentralize stormwater management, reduce some of the negatives from stormwater management, turn it more into a positive, and also treat the pollution, treat the runoff closer to the source. And the thought is that will create better stormwater management, have better pollution removal, and provide an actual benefit by having all this green infrastructure in your community versus somewhere down at the bottom, way out of the way. And this is a huge change. This is, starting on March 2nd, applications that come in, assuming your town has the ordinance in place, will have to comply with this. And that is going to be a huge paradigm shift for developers, for property owners, because they're going to have to now maintain, 10 or 15 different smaller systems versus 1 or 2 larger ones. But, that's kind of important. This is a little bit of a data chart and kind of hard to see. But impervious cover is increasing and increasing and increasing. It hasn't slowed down. DP released this summer through Rowan their land use cover and change report. It's still increasing. The rate has slowed down a bit, but we're still turning our land, our forest, our wetlands, our farms into urban development. And that's important because it really alters sort of the water cycle. Normally in the natural environment, this will change a little bit depending where you are in the state, but when rain falls, 50% of that goes into the ground, 40% evapotranspirates, and only 10% runs off. as you get more and more to an urban development where you have 75 to 100% impervious cover, and a lot of our communities are at that, only 15% is getting into the ground. 55% is running off, carrying all that pollution. The temperature is increasing because those surfaces are hotter than the natural condition. And as I said, they're bringing their pollution with them, and they're running off at a more rapid rate than it would in the natural condition. Research is telling us that when you hit about 10% impervious cover in your watershed is impaired. And that's probably a very generous number to development. That, really, if more and more research is probably tacking that number lower and lower than that 10% number. But 10% is the number we've been using for years as a sort of rule of thumb. And one of the things we note is, you have all this impervious cover. As I mentioned, the quantity things aren't really a quantity, it's a rate runoff. And you also look at the purposes of stormwater management. And this originally sort of surprised me. You're not eliminating flood damage, you're trying to reduce it. So the way the rules are sort of constructed, you're increasing the volume, but you're changing the rate, and hopefully that's going to reduce but not eliminate flood damage. You're trying to maintain groundwater recharge, and you're going to try to prevent, but not really, you're going to slow the increase in non-point source pollution, runoff pollution. You're not eliminating it, you're not stopping it, you are minimizing it. So DEP came out with this green infrastructure rule. As I said, came out on March 2nd of 2020, and then the state promptly shut down for many, many, many months. And one of the big things, as I said, municipalities have 1 year to adopt a new ordinance, which means if your town has not adopted it at this point, they are behind the curve, because there's also a 60-day review period by the counties, and your ordinance are supposed to be in place by March 2nd. So when an application comes in on March 2nd, your new rules apply. As I mentioned, the green infrastructure codifies that what surfaces you treat for quality and not. They changed the mitigation requirements, and I'm not going to really go into it unless people want to talk about that. And mitigation requirements only really apply if you have a mitigation plan. A lot of towns, matter of fact, I'm going to hazard an educated guess that 90% of towns don't have a mitigation plan in place for stormwater management. And we talked about the green infrastructure, what it is. We talked about the motor vehicle surface. Again, if you can drive or park some sort of motor vehicle, whether it is an airplane, motorcycle, or car, you have to treat water quality. The major development, duplicate slides. As I mentioned, that 10% impervious cover number as a limit for impaired or not impaired. So DEP supposedly every 2 years, we're a couple years behind, releases I keep calling it the Integrated Water Quality Monitoring Report. It's not the exact title, but they're supposed to report every 2 years on the health of New Jersey's waters. Green is good, red is bad, yellow means we don't know enough. So most, if not all, of New Jersey's waters, there's probably 1 or 2 stream segments in this state that meet all of the standards. The rest are impaired for 1 or more reasons. And what DEP is saying in the 2016 report, our worst waters are getting better. Our best waters are degrading. And as impervious cover increases, that makes sense. Understanding that stormwater rules are not eliminating pollution, but are reducing it, or trying to reduce the amount that comes off, that all makes sense. And the vast majority of impairments nowadays are because of our land use. So the Watershed Institute came up with an enhanced model ordinance, attempt to even ratchet down and treat more stormwater so that we, at least if we don't reverse the curve, but we sort of hold the line. So one of those was reducing the trigger for major development. One of them is creating a minor development requirement so that even if you're not doing a major project, not building a house or an office building, but you are contributing to the stormwater pollution, you are also contributing to the solution. We also had an on-site retention standard. So you are actually holding on site, you're dealing with the volume, not necessarily the rate, so that if it can't leave the site, you're not flooding out your neighbors and you're not releasing pollution from your site. And we think this is very important, having an inspection program. Because one of the things throughout the state we note, as many other groups in DEP, one of the problems with stormwater management is we're not maintaining the systems we have. And if they're not being maintained, they're not functioning. And there's an obligation by the municipalities every year to report back to DEP that all of the publicly and privately owned systems are being maintained. And we think by having an inspection and permitting system and self-reporting, you're going to get better maintenance and you start to identify where you have problems. And to add some flexibility for that minor development requirement, a waiver so that if it's impossible to meet the stormwater or it doesn't really make sense to do that minor development requirements on site, you have the ability to waive, you pay into a fee, and the municipality can then use that fee to help maintain their systems, improve their systems, and help the overall stormwater management. So we know impervious cover is increasing, we know pollution's increasing. At the same time, rainfall is increasing. This chart's a couple of years old. I've been meaning to update it, but we've been seeing almost 3.45 inches of increased rain from the 20th century to the 21st century. So that's increased volume, which is a little over 500 billion gallons more of stormwater in New Jersey that we have to deal with. And the way we design our systems, we design them to meet the 2, 10, and 100-year storm. But the problem with that is when you think 100-year storm, you have to realize whether it's 2, 10, or 100, what we're calling that. So, a 2-year storm is 3.3 inches in Mercer County where I live. That number is based upon 106 years of data that DEP has and averaged that ended in 2006. So it does not account for 14 years worth additional rainfall changes, and it doesn't at all account for future. So our systems are going to have to be designed not only to account for actual current conditions, but future conditions. The other thing that's happening, the pattern of rainfall is changing. The Northeast, and in particular, is seeing an increasing amount of the extreme events. Not necessarily hurricanes, but heavy rain systems where you're getting that 3.3 inches dumped in a matter of hours, not over 24 hours or 2 days. That has increased significantly, which also sort of impacts on how we're managing stormwater, because instead of letting it sort of spread out throughout, hours or days, now it's all being dumped out at once. So recognizing that, DEP came up with the governor in beginning of last year issued executive orders, the New Jersey Protecting Against Climate Change Threats, and directed DEP to update their rules to incorporate climate change. So DEP's had a handful of meetings in the last couple months. Excuse me, something popped up. And they're going to come out with a new set of rules addressing land use regulations. So your flood hazard rules, your freshwater wetlands rules, your coastal zone management act rules. And so this is sort of their guiding principle. We want to protect against the anticipated level of risk, what we're going to see in the future, not necessarily what happened in the past. We want to make sure that property owners understand what risks they're taking. We want to protect the public from those risks. So if you're not in the floodplain today, but you're going to be in the floodplain in the next 20 years. What are the regulatory requirements you should meet to put yourself in that risk? And should you put yourself in that risk? Making sure DEP science is updated and that they're using the most current science, so they're not using 14-year-old data when more recent data is available. And setting in systems that are protective, and then trying to use nature, green infrastructure being one of those, living shorelines, another, to sort of protect the environment and protect us from the environment. So sort of went through a little bit of this. So like I said, they're going to release new rules. That release is going to be in the next several months. They're going to talk about, changing what the flood zone is, the flood hazard area, both coastally as well as inland, because of the increased volume as well as the increased temperature, streams are becoming, have more volume. We're going to try to protect our bridges and our roads and our buildings better. Plan for climate change, so there's going to be a requirement for towns in their master plan to have a resiliency plan to help address and help their community adapt. Talking about where to put green infrastructure. And they're also, even though towns are now sort of barreling through trying to adopt the new green infrastructure rule, they're going to be proposing new to the stormwater rules. And some of those, again, they're going to be proposing that sometime in the next several months. I hope they don't do them at the same time, because these are going to be massive rules, which are going to take me way too much time to read and respond to. But they're going to have that on-site retention, which is something our model ordinance has. They're going to require redevelopment. So our stormwater rules do not address redevelopment. If you have a site that was built in the 50s when there was no stormwater management, and you redevelop that site, unless you create a new quarter-acre of impervious surface, you still don't have, by and large, stormwater management. There's a little few caveats there, but in reality, you have no stormwater management. And then they're going to really integrate better their land use rules, the flood hazard rules, the freshwater wetlands rules, and stormwater management. A lot of developers will say to the town, don't worry, DEP will look at it. Unless you have a flood hazard permit or a freshwater wetlands permit or one of those other DEP permits, DEP does not look at stormwater management. That's one of those things that drives me nuts. And I'm always told I'm wrong, but DEP thinks they see maybe less than 50% of the development applications that come through the state because the other 50+% don't need a permit. So that's sort of things that are coming. The NJ-PAC rules, the stormwater rules. And so all of this, the green infrastructure rule really created an opportunity for the Watershed Institute, and I think created an opportunity for a lot of organizations, and will create opportunities for the future. As we were educating environmental commission members and the public about the new rules, we started to get a sense that people really wanted to get involved, wanted to protect their communities, and didn't know how. And that's one of the sort of benefits of COVID. People seemed to have more time because they weren't commuting to attend meetings. And so we put on a bunch of webinars and programs, and one of them was this Volunteering for Advocacy program, which we've now changed to Community Watershed Advocacy Program, where we brought in a group of individuals who were interested, trained them to be better advocates. Here's just a sample of what the program, it was an intensive program. It was 8 weeks long with multiple webinars and reading material, but it really engaged the community. So we had, I think it was 50 some people throughout our watershed, plus really glom onto it. And one of the hopes with it, Allison and I've talked about this a couple times, we can't, the Watershed Institute, I have 25, 30 towns that I sort of am in it's really hard to keep up with what's going on in each. So by educating and training a army, so to speak, of people that can advocate for themselves, they also can be the eyes and ears of the Watershed Institute. So we can better know what's going on and when we can and should weigh in. So we did that. We're going to start doing that again. But it really, and there was one group in particular in Lawrence Township. There were several people who took the program and have really become super engaged, and are really engaging not only with the Watershed Institute, but really engaging with their town. And I think that's really having some positive benefits. So, talking about stormwater management, people are really just surprised about this whole thing. They didn't know about the green infrastructure rule. They didn't understand where their flooding was coming from. Something as simple as removing trees from your site increases your stormwater issue. So, opportunities for groups like yours to really engage with your members and the community itself about these issues. Engaging with the elected, the ECs. We gave presentations on the new rules in our enhanced model ordinance. I think we gave them to like 15 or 16 different towns in addition to the various webinars we put on over the year. And that really helped galvanize a group of people to advocate for us and with us for better stormwater management. Train the community members. There's things we have Stream Watch. Aaron Stretz, who's our Associate Director of Science, but also I keep forgetting her actual title, but she runs the statewide volunteer science monitoring network. So she helps organizations set up stream watch programs so they can have their community out there monitoring their streams, knowing what is going on in those streams, and better protecting. Again, the more you know, the more you love, and the more you want to protect. Stream cleanups. We do that, and many groups do that. And again, that's a way to get down and dirty into your community, see what's going on, meet new people, and really engage them for your issues. And then, the Watershed Institute's been doing a lot. Again, sort of the benefit of COVID is we were able to do a bunch of webinars. Something that we normally would not have done. We have probably done 1 or 2 programs in the year. We have an annual conference on watershed issues, but wanting to step up to the plate and not having to bring people to the middle of nowhere, Hopewell Township, really expanded our reach to, we did a program in September on the enhanced rules and the green infrastructure rules. We had 340 some people register for it. 240 some people attend, and representing about 140 towns throughout the state. So this really, everyone is Zoomed out or WebExed out, but I think people are really hungry to get involved and to learn. And so it's much easier to do a webinar. You lose the free pizza and the gatherings, but you can do things like this relatively easy. Bring in speakers who don't have to travel, and really get some discussions going with members and provide education. So that is a bunch of slides, lots of information. I don't know if people have questions or want me to go back over something. So.
Thank you, Mike. Excellent, excellent, excellent presentation for our first meeting of the year. I really think that you've so amazingly set the stage and in educating us and enlightening us about all the issues. This is what the Whippany River Watershed Action Committee is all about, and you've definitely shed so much light and so much knowledge and resource on the issues, and it's really just great to have this. I think as our first presenter for the year. The guest speaker bureau, as Mike said, Mike spoke, I think, when I was here a few years ago, working with Art on, and it's just really wonderful to have our speaker bureau. They want to come back. And yeah, I guess the free pizza is a good lure, but we encourage people to bring their free pizza and eat from home as we're getting our enlightened. So I would encourage you all to it's easier if you want to type in your questions. I just took a stab at putting in quotes some of the key points and key ideas that grabbed me in listening to Mike's presentation. I'm a layperson. I'm not an environmental scientist or an attorney, but I did try to capture some of the key points, and we do check in with our speakers to let them know we are recording this for to put on our website, and so that even though we may have 10 or 15 people tonight, we do have people visiting our website and checking out the presentations after. So,
Correct.
Does anyone have any questions for Mike? We can unmute. If you do, you can unmute yourself and speak up. If you don't want to type them in the chat, we are about 12 people, so we could probably monitor some questions from the floor without typing to the chat.
I'll start. So, Mike, Larry Gendorf here with the WERWAC. I guess the question I would have is, we have a watershed association where we're here to protect our watershed. And you probably have seen many watershed associations like ours either do well or not do well. Could you maybe share some of the more successful things you have seen come out of groups like ours around the state that you think are effective uses of our time?
You know what? I think, especially on COVID, trying to bring in that education component and engagement. It's much harder to engage now than it used to be. And in some ways it's easier. So providing information, providing something, an action, a takeaway for people. So I could talk about the stormwater management, and I've done for more times than I'd like to think now. But then saying to the member, the EC member or something like that, here's the model ordinance. You need to talk to your elected officials. You need to help us talk to your elected officials. You need to get your neighbors to talk about this, why it's important, giving them an action item, something they can take away and do.
Okay. Thank you, Mike. We did have a question come in from our member from Morris Township, Rachel Linden. Welcome, Rachel, to our committee. What are the major kinds of known pollutants that are of concern in regards to water quality?
So there is a ton. Total suspended solids is a big one. This time of year, road salt, we're starting to see and trying to figure out how that's really impacting. So that's getting into our waterways, which obviously increase salinity, but it also increases erosion. I don't understand that connection, but also it's getting into our groundwater. So our groundwater is becoming in some areas saltier. So that's big, roadways, you got the oil, you got gas, you have, heavy metals from brakes and asbestos, nutrient pollution. We all love our green lawns, but there's a downside to that. And if you have a stream on your property and you have a bright green lawn right to it, it looks nice, but you're killing that stream or that lake downhill from you.
Allison, I have a question, if I may.
Sure. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thanks. So, Mike, nice presentation.
Thank you.
The traditional detention basins are typically maintained with, they're either on separate lots in a larger development. There's a homeowners association that's charged with maintaining that. When you have these scattered small basins in a development, how does that work as far as maintenance? And are you said something about deed restrictions or notices on the deeds. So are individual lots and homeowners impacted with these structures, or is the idea that they'll still be under the purview of some sort of a homeowners association? And if not, if they're on an individual's lot, how do you make sure that gets maintained? And kind of an ancillary to this, my sister had a house built in Pennsylvania, and she has one of these, in her backyard on their property. And quite frankly, she doesn't have any little kids, but it takes up a large portion of the backyard, and it's not real attractive looking. So what's your response to those concerns?
So DEP still will require a homeowners association to be in charge of the maintenance. So whether the developer, sections off different lots or has a easement on the individual property owner's lot to maintain it, it still will be the homeowners association's responsibility for doing that. I think so. I mean, and that creates some challenges, quite honestly, because instead of doing one giant one where we have a hard time maintaining it, now you're doing 10 or 15, depending on the site. But if you design these things properly, the maintenance should be minimum. So we have a stormwater specialist who came from Northern Virginia, who's done a lot of this, and her philosophy is dense plantings, not a lot of mulch, but dense planting, so you don't have a whole lot of weeds coming in, and a very simple palette of plants. So you have 2 or 3 different kinds of plants, not 15 or 20 of them. Because the problem with that is, what's a weed? What was supposed to be there? What's a weed? You have 2 or 3 different kinds of ones. It's very easy to identify the weeds. And after the first couple of years, the maintenance should be pretty simple going forwards. So, making sure your trash rack or your outfall is clean, making sure it drains in the 72 hours it's supposed to. But your maintenance shouldn't be that difficult. And since you're not mowing a giant basin, you're not spraying it, there should be some reduced costs in that as well. And we've seen a couple times where wet ponds have been installed. So this is a BMP with standing water that's supposed to be there year round, and either rocks to keep the geese out or native vegetation and shrubs around the edge. Well, we've seen quite a few instances where the homeowners association, for whatever reason, whether they were never told on how to maintain it or they didn't care or something, they were mowing right down to the edge of the BMP, the water. So all the shrubs and native plants that were planted on the edge to keep the geese out and to provide some filtering was gone. And you now had invasive species take over and Phragmites, and the system stopped working. So I think this is a paradigm shift, and it is a change in how we do it. So maintenance and education and instruction is going to be vital to do that. And we're doing a couple programs, and we're doing 2 one starting tomorrow, a certification program on training people on how to design and install these so they are functional, and then one on how to maintain them for public works departments. And then sort of the aesthetic. So you can have a rain garden that is, you can almost mimic a, well manicured English manor type of rain garden all the way down. I don't know if I used in the front of this one, a more wild sort of, carefree rain garden. We have several on our site. I can't remember whether I used it for the front picture, just to give you an idea. And I did not. So, excuse me. So, I mean, there's going to be a huge education component. So, hopefully that addressed your questions.
Yeah, I don't see any more questions in the chat. Does anyone have any chat questions they'd like to talk about or bring up vocally? Thank you, Commissioner Shaw. I have a question, if I may. Well, it's really not a question, but I did attend the virtual conference that you had, and I thought it was excellent. The array of speakers and the topics, and the amount talk about community and civic engagement. It was wonderful. Do you have your virtual conference, some of those presentations posted on your website?
Yep. So all of those presentations, I think all the videos should be up on our website. So if you weren't able to attend it, and you should be able to go back and get it.
Okay.
Nice.
And just a shout out for the rain gardens. I did visit the your site at it was a couple of years ago, but it's a beautiful facility. So if anyone has a chance to get down there, it's quite a wonderful talk about environment. It's a wonderful work environment. It's beautiful.
Horrible.
It definitely puts the money where the mouth is, or walks the talk, because it's very picturesque as well as natural setting and everything. So I don't see any other
I think Judy Hernandez had a question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Judy, nice to see you.
Let me unmute.
No, I think you're good now.
I'm good. Okay, thank you, Mike, for your presentation. I guess I have a general question. I've done the green infrastructure program at Rutgers. I'm on the planning board in Parsippany, and the environmental committee. It's not a commission, and we now started a Parsippany Green team. And I feel like I am begging, can I see this new stormwater stuff that you're working on? Can we think of rain garden projects that we can do? Because we do have that issue in Parsippany, and I'm just being met with a lot of, even with the developers at planning board, it's like they think if they're providing the green infrastructure, it's nice to do, and I'm like, this is what you have to do. And so I'm wondering, is this just my town, or is this something that, never mind just advocacy, I just feel like I'm becoming a nuisance to them by wanting to force this issue.
Thank you for being a nuisance. I probably attend 1, 2, or 3 planning zoning board meetings a week sometimes. And I've been doing that for 10 or 15 years. Stormwater management barely ever gets mentioned at these meetings. It's sort of like, yes, we've met the rules. And I think it's the planning board's obligation to actually understand what is being proposed and approve it, and not rely on the town's engineer to say, yeah, it's fine. There was the thing called the non-structural strategies, which the new rules got rid of, which was a huge mistake and a whole nother rabbit hole we could go down to for another hour. And those were techniques to minimize the need for stormwater management. And applicants were supposed to do that to the maximum extent practical. It was never practical, so it never got done. And only got done when planning board members or the public pushed back and said, you have all your impervious cover connected. Can you disconnect it? Could you provide some green space between it? And, those types of things. Once your town has the new ordinance in place and actually enforces it, green infrastructure is going to be the norm, not the exception, and shouldn't be something you have to, nag for or demand. It should be the go-to solution. I'm not going to do green infrastructure is going to be the exception. And, getting real green infrastructure, that's going to be, even harder, because there's ways to play even the new rules so you don't get it, or you don't get what you really should get. But education, getting the public to be there for you, as well, so that the other planning board members are hearing this time and time again, and finally, eventually, it starts to click. So again, thank you for being that voice and continue to do it. I know it's sometimes difficult.
Yeah, I would like to.
You said that these are the rules, for green infrastructure. I'm sorry I came a little late to the meeting. Actually, it was very late, and so I didn't hear 95% of your talk. But are the rules that you're talking about, are they mandated by the state or anything for
Yes.
what the green infrastructure is for new development?
Yes. Yes.
Where would you find that?
It was actually, if you go to NJ Stormwater, the new rules should be there. They actually put together a model ordinance for municipalities so they could adopt that. That model ordinance. We have a model ordinance with some enhancements on our website as well. Because the way DEP implements the stormwater rules is through the municipalities, through the planning board and zoning board approvals.
So, of course, I don't have a pen.
I'll put it in the chat.
Please. Where the two places I should look.
Yep.
Okay. Now the other thing is that have you seen many towns in my readings on stormwater management? Towns have developed a separate department as part of their DPW to take care of the collection of water for stormwater. I don't know if I'm saying it properly.
Yeah. So, the DPW, they're supposed to, go out and look at publicly owned stuff. Like everything, there is way too many things to do, not enough time, and definitely not enough money. So my sense in most municipalities, that work only gets done when there's a problem, not when, sort of the preventative maintenance, the preventative stuff. We are running a maintenance course at the end of February for Public Works Department. So they they understand what this green infrastructure is. There's been
Is there a fee for that?
It's $150 for the entire department. So whether you have a one-person department or a 10-person department, we can provide that.
Can you send that information to Allison so you have her contact so that she could forward it to me?
I certainly will. I mean, because there's been a couple stories where rain gardens were installed and either no one told the Public Works Department or, they didn't understand.
And actually, I get Judith from Parsippany. I think you'd be interested in that also.
They would just go in and mow over everything and just, pull out all of the weeds, which weren't weeds. So, getting this, and, once March 1st rolls around and those projects start getting approved, we'll start to really see a demand and a real need to have that education. So we're going to start doing that up front.
Okay. I'm sorry I missed your talk.
Dennis, it will be recorded and it will be on our website with the slides.
Okay.
And I put your links in the chat. Mike, if you have any additional links, but I just went to the DEP website.
Okay. Yep, I'll send them to you.
So if there are no other questions for Mike, we just have about 10 minutes of organizational housekeeping, logistics, dates for you to save, and then we will call it an evening. Mike, thank you so much. It's been so educational. I think more importantly, it's great for everyone on the call to, Larry's clapping and I'll clap too.
Well, thank you. My pleasure.
To have a name and a face at such a great organization that does what is our mission. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. And if people have questions for you, they would just
Send me an email, give me a call. We're more than happy to sit down and try to help or provide guidance. We're lucky. Like I said, I have a staff of 30. Not everyone has that. So.
Okay, great. All right, thank you. And if
Thank you.
Mike, you're welcome to stay on, and
Yeah.
if you want to hear some of our upcoming meetings. Okay, great. Now I'm really on the spot. So I'd like to welcome all the new